Hi everyone, I just wanted to make a quick update about my giant cave roaches because these guys are actually fascinating and one of my favorite species. So as you probably heard that in my Panacea video as well, but those wood-eating roaches and cave roaches, the genus Blaberus, are my absolute favorites. So after covering the Panaceas and Sarganas, I thought that I'm going to talk about my Blaberus roaches next, and these guys are my favorites among them, and lots of people seem to like these roaches and want to get these roaches. Now the thing with them is that many people experience colony collapses. So I've read the accounts of many keepers that after their colony reaches a certain size, they experience a sudden collapse when the roaches just start dying, and people offer many explanations as to why this would happen. And some people say that the nymphs start bothering the adults, and this causes stress, and then the adults die. Other people say that inbreeding is a big problem. If you keep your colony too small, inbreeding is definitely going to be a problem. This is a problem with my colony as well. I haven't experienced any losses, fortunately, but I'm still trying to get roaches of this species, but from a different stock or a different line. My problem with these roaches is that I originally got just 10 nymphs, and only 6 of them made it to adulthood. And out of those 6, I had only 1 female. So all of the roaches that you see in this enclosure are from the same mother. They might have different fathers, but they all come from the same female roach. I'd like to avoid any colony collapses, and I really like to have roaches from a different line. Now, I know some people say that you shouldn't mix any of the lines, especially with Blaberus, where we know that there can be huge differences between localities. So my plan is still, just as like over a year ago, is to have adults from or individuals from a different line, and then keep some of these guys separately, some of the new lines separately, and do a mixed colony as well. So that way I can actually compare and see what happens, because that would be, like, I think, a good test to see if inbreeding could be the problem behind, or the cause behind, colony collapses. But I know you might want to hear about keeping these roaches, like you like to know what to do with these guys. Well, my biggest advice, if you would like to have these roaches, is have a big tub or a big enclosure. This is getting really small for them. This is why I thought of this video, because I'm just getting a big plastic tub for them. I will certainly keep some of them in this enclosure, because as you can see, these guys are amazing. I have a light here, I have a light source there, and they are still just chilling there. So if you want to have a display roach, this is the #1 species. I could highly recommend getting them, because they don't really hide. I can see even some nymphs in the corner chilling out on these big wooden bark pieces. So they don't really hide. The nymphs need a thicker substrate. What I notice is smaller nymphs like to hide in the substrate, and as they grow bigger and bigger, they like to hide under or on the bark pieces. What I found, and I think it's also really interesting, is at my previous generation, so when these guys started growing up, somehow the nymphs always gathered under one piece of these barks, and the adults were gathering elsewhere. So they were chilling out totally separately. So this is also an interesting thing with them. So just to recap, the biggest thing is to have a big enclosure, and then you absolutely need some vertical climbing surfaces for them. It can be egg crates, of course. I just like the look of these wooden bark pieces, and you know, these are free. I would need to buy the egg crates, and I can find these for free. And you also need some good substrate for them to hide. I'd like to cover the details of the substrate in a separate video, because I have a lot to say about substrate for Blaberus roaches. So I'm going to keep that a separate video, but just, use something that isn't chunky. That's a number one with these guys. They don't like chunky substrate at all, and something that doesn't get compacted, because they need to, be able to burrow in the substrate. They also prefer if the substrate is mildly moist, so they don't like when it dries out. And these are the top things. Now you can see these roaches are huge. They eat very little. So what I found with these guys is that I need to feed them more often than other roaches, because they eat very little at a time, at least in my colony. They also need a high protein diet, just like other cave roaches. Well, I mainly give them fish flakes or cat food, but as I also have snakes, baby snakes, sometimes they refuse to eat the frozen thawed pinky mice. And sometimes I give these guys the mice so they could, have some nice protein in their diet. And you can see that there are big roaches in here, and many big roaches, like really 20, 30 adults. And last time I gave them a pinky mice, it took 2 days. It took them 2 days to actually eat it. Yeah, and just as a comparison, if I give a pinky mice to my death's head roaches, they eat it in, I don't know, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. These guys were like munching on it for 2 days. So fish flakes is a better option because they eat very little. They also like beetle jelly. So this is my only roach species that I actually buy. Sometimes I buy beetle jelly from a friend of mine. I got gifted a lot from this friend, and I fed them, and they really, really enjoyed it. So since they eat a little at a time, I find that beetle jelly works better for them, because that doesn't get moldy, doesn't dry out. So if I'm feeling fancy and like spending money, I give them beetle jelly, and they really enjoy it. Or I make my own beetle jelly if I'm not lazy. But otherwise, they are pretty easy to keep. These are just the most important things that I found. And temperature, of course. This was my biggest issue, because, gas prices. This year, my animal room is about 2 or 3 degrees colder than usual. So for the previous, so these adults, it took them well over a year. So maybe 14 to 15 months to actually mature, because it was cold in the room. So when I realized that this might be a problem for these roaches, I bought a lamp, and so a heating lamp that they sell for reptiles, and put it on the top of this enclosure. And that was the reason why I decided to put them into a reptile enclosure and not a tub, because I wanted to provide them a heat source, and it really did help. And these guys actually were basking under the light source. So higher temperatures really help these guys. So we will see what happens with this generation. I hope I don't need to wait more than a year for them to mature. So yeah, this was just a quick update on these roaches. They are doing really well. I'd like to get into in more detail to the substrate, because that was my biggest struggle. And with the previous generation, I had problems with the nymphs dying, because my substrate, I think it was the substrate, it was too compacted. The nymphs couldn't hide, and some of them actually died, dried out. And I had lots of issues, so substrate has been my biggest concern. So in the next video, I'd like to talk about the substrate, and I have 3 other Blaberus species, nothing fancy unfortunately, but I still would like to show them and give you like little comparison, just as with the Panestias, so you could actually, see the difference. So thank you so much for your attention. I hope you liked seeing these amazing roaches, and next week I'm going to show you more Blaberus roaches, and then I'm going to show you the substrate I make for these roaches. I'm going to share you my recipe, what works, and I'm going to talk about what didn't work at all. meet these guys. So thank you and see you hopefully next week. Bye.